Hello, everybody, and welcome to the 2 a.m. Campfire Club. I'm Reagan.
I'm Madelyn.
Yeah. And this week it is just the two of us. Ethan is indisposed, so we're going to have a great time, just the two of us talking about LGBT issues and the church. For those who don't know, the topics for this show rotate. So each of the three of us, Madelyn, Ethan, and I, change out who gets to pick the topic and kind of be in charge of the podcast for the week. And so this week, I am leading the conversation because this is an issue that affects me personally. I am both trans and bisexual. I'm gender fluid, which the way that I describe that is like my experience of my own gender fluctuates, which is kind of a vague descriptor, but I'll explain why I say it that way as we get into it a little bit more. But the biggest thing is I am a Christian. I believe in God, and I have grown up in the church my whole life. So that is the biggest part of my identity. That is where I kind of believe everything else flows from is from God. And those three things, my queerness and my faith, I have been told that they should conflict with each other. And that has always been a source of hardship for me. And I think while I love my church and while I love having grown up in the church and while I love my faith, I think the LGBT community and honestly a lot of social justice issues are where I have seen both in my own life and in wider society, in the wider church, that we have a tendency to fall short and not really be the church to certain segments of our population. So I wanted to talk about my own experience growing up with that and kind of explain my deal and what I believe and why I believe it and what I've seen from the church. So we're going to get into a lot of very personal stuff about myself and my life and my trauma. And a lot of that has been caused by Christians and by the church. So I don't want to be resentful or say anything out of resentment or cast any sort of hatred on anybody. But, some of these places where I'm speaking from are like hurt places. And so I hope everybody can listen with an open mind and an open heart and take into account what I have to say. That doesn't mean that you have to believe everything that I believe, but I wanted to share my story because I think, honestly, in a lot of the conversations that I've heard from people within the church on LGBT issues, the absence of actual queer people and actual queer voices within the conversation has been glaringly obvious and has led to blind spots. So I don't know. I feel like to me, it should be obvious that when you're talking about issues that affect certain groups, that people within those groups should be the people that you go to.
Yeah, not just like, oh, hey, I'm gonna ask this random, we'll just put it out here, like a random white straight guy, the basic thing. Like, you're not, I don't want to talk to them about queerness or anything like that, because I'm like, you obviously don't know what you're really talking about.
Yeah.
Because it's just one of those things where it's just like, well, why would I ask you when I also have this other source that's probably a lot more educated than you that I know? And I feel like that's not like hating on churches here, but it is a lot of people that I feel like that they don't know what they're talking about, but like when they do talk about it, it just doesn't feel correct. Because you're like, why are you explaining it? Like I'm not trying to hate on people, but it's like, you might know a lot about it. I don't know. But it's like, I feel like the person that has gone through it should be talking about it, sort of thing. It's just,
yeah,
it makes more sense.
I think oftentimes it's kind of treated as a theological issue rather than like a people issue,
Yeah.
which I mean can be a problem in many ways that like the church talks about many different issues. It's so depersonalized and it's treated as something that's like out there, and like sort of a philosophical theological discussion when it's like no, like this is reality for a lot of people and probably people who are in the room. So welcoming them into feeling like they're able to speak up and say their own experiences is like it's so important. And that doesn't mean that like you have to agree, you know, like with this issue, you don't have to agree with every queer person or you know on these issues. Like there's differences of opinion, you know, and that's like not to say that people who like with this issue, people who it's not to say that straight people or cis people aren't allowed to have an opinion, but to have a truly informed opinion, you need to go to the source. So that's kind of what I wanted to do here was like as a both a Christian and a you know out and proud queer person, like I wanted to contribute my own voice to it because that is something that is sorely lacking. And I think there's this polarization between like the queer community and Christianity because so, or maybe not even so many of us, but probably all LGBT people, at least in the West, have been severely hurt by the church and by rhetoric that is often peddled within the church. So that was kind of a long preamble to basically I wanted to talk a little bit about like the theology of the anti-LGBT movement within the church and why I think it's kind of flawed. And I don't want to talk about like I don't want to just talk about the verses that are kind of said to be against homosexuality because I feel like those have been so thoroughly like debunked with like, oh, it's a translation error that more would more accurately be described as pedophilia or you know historical context or all that stuff. Like I feel like most of that stuff, like if you can Google it and basically find
it'd be like the spark notes of the Bible basically about what people think about it.
Yeah, like most of that stuff, like that was the earliest stuff that when I was truly looking for answers on these questions, like that stuff I found immediately. And a lot of those conclusions I came to like on my own and then afterwards found people who were saying the same things of like, hang on, like, you know, like in the verse in Leviticus, this is like, man shall not lie with man. I was like, but like, this is Leviticus. We don't take everything that Leviticus says at face value. So what is the historical context? Oh, well, that was a common, you know, that was a common practice of temple prostitution and you know, so all this stuff. And so like I don't want to go through like every verse in the Bible that is like that is cited against homosexuality because there's like 6 of them, which is not that many.
Yeah.
But you know, that's not what I'm here to do. I want to talk specifically about what the general view of gender within the church and how that influences our discussions on sexuality. Because I feel like that is so much more deeply rooted and much more complicated. So here, I'll start from the beginning. Growing up within the church and honestly within wider society, I had just kind of heard that it was bad to be gay and, you know, didn't really think that much of it, but I never had that like intuitive, like gut feeling of like, oh, this is sin. Like, you know, like you come face to face with sin, like usually you know it's wrong on some like intuitive level. But I never really, you know, I saw like gay people on TV or whatever, and I was never like disgusted by it.
Yeah.
But and like so I didn't really start, but I didn't really start like actually critically thinking about it until about like middle school. And it was middle school that was the first time that I had ever come in like encountered like trans people at all. Like that was the first time I really encountered
Mhm.
the concept. Um, because like I've always felt very like alienated from my own gender, and so I never really thought about it. So and then like as I started to be introduced to more complete like understanding of gender, then that's when I kind of started questioning for myself, like, am I trans? So, and all of that time, I think what I was really unraveling was less like, because there's no point in the Bible where it says like don't be trans. Like there's no verse in the
Yeah.
Bible. Like that was not a concern that the Bible was, the authors of the Bible had that they were trying to address. It's the same thing with like abortion. That wasn't a thing back then, so we can't just look directly to the Bible and say, "Oh, this is what it has to say about this."
Mhm.
We have to go in with an informed understanding, but a godly understanding that does, is influenced by scripture, when we look at these modern issues. And I think honestly with sexuality, it's kind of the same way. Like gender and sexuality are kind of are two separate issues, but they're inextricably linked. Especially with I think the way that we talk about it in the church, because like typically what I've heard is basically, the Christian version of marriage, true marriage is like one man and one woman, because God created man and woman distinctly to marry. Um, and they are, the marriage between a man and a woman is supposed to represent the relationship between God and his church. The problem that I have with that is, well, I mean, it's just reductive, because like think that I don't think that any Christian actually believes that it is a moral imperative to get married in the first place.
Yeah.
Obviously, like there are plenty of people, who choose to be unmarried, who choose to be celibate, who are considered holy, priests, monks, nuns,
Mhm.
Paul. And also, that is not the example that was actually shown to us within the Bible. So we don't believe as a church that that heterosexual marriage is required to be complete, right? Like we just
Mhm.
flat out don't think that. And so if you're going to argue that marriage is between a man and a woman, you have to argue that there is something intrinsic within the two genders, within the two sexes, that makes that like gives them a different role within a marriage, and that is special to that sex. And I don't know how you do that without like getting into some very like sexist territory, without
Yeah.
being like, yes, uh, men do, they do the work and they give the orders, and they take care and are the protectors of the women, and the women are submissive and do the housework and raise the babies and all of that stuff, which like historically the church has said, but that's something that I don't think, well, an embarrassingly a large amount of the church still does think that, but like
Yeah.
generally I don't think there's nobody that I know personally, and I don't think, that's not something that our church
Yeah.
subscribes to. So, but that is kind of a version of gender that the Bible outlines.
Mhm.
So the way that I see it, I mean, gender is a social construct. Like, it's something that only exists because we decide it exists. It's something that we created
Yeah.
to serve a function. And I think it's important to look at the historical context of the Bible and see the function that it served at the time, because society back then looked very different than it does now. And
Yeah.
you know, like, I was reading First Peter the other day, and I was doing devotions, and I was like, you know, waking up and like, yes, I want to start my day with some good godly words, and then it was basically like, women need to be submissive and all this stuff, and it was just like, I was just like, okay.
And then you're just like,
this is a great start to my
guess
day.
We're doing that
just
today.
A whole lot of misogyny. And
yeah,
you know,
and then you wake up the next morning, you're just like, don't know if I feel like doing that again. We'll wait a little bit.
I was just like very upset at Peter.
I know,
and
because it's like, wait, why'd you say that? But it's honestly, that's how it worked.
Yeah, exactly. Like, and I think I'm not somebody who believes that the Bible is infallible. I would say the majority of the Christian church believes, especially like evangelicals. I'll speak to evangelicalism. Like, one of the tenets of the evangelical church is that the Bible is completely true and good. Like, everything that is said in the Bible is either like historical fact or like correct in some like emotional or like reasonable sense. So if the Bible says this is how something is, then that's how it is. And I don't think that that's true. I don't think that.
Yeah.
I flat out do not. There's no tangible evidence that I've seen that you know, that God divinely inspired the writers of the Bible to speak nothing but exact truth. And in fact, there is evidence against that. There are contradictions within the Bible. There is historical inaccuracy, and I mean, straight up, like, things that are commanded within the Bible practically don't work and aren't good. And so I don't. I mean, I've seen like people accuse other people, like people who don't think that the Bible is infallible, of being cherry pickers, or just like, oh, because you don't think everything's true, you're just going to take out the bits that you like. And I don't think that that's true, honestly, because what I see for people who believe in biblical infallibility is they take everything at face value until they can't justify it anymore. Like, you know, until there's something incredibly sexist, or like, oh, the Bible's justifying slavery, and then they think, okay, now it's time, we need to bring in historical context. We need to talk about, you know, we actually need to be critical and apply these critical lenses to it. Whereas, you know, when I read the Bible, I'm always applying that critical lens. Like, I always want to know, you know, the perspective of the person who is writing it, the perspective of the society that they came from, and, you know, the power dynamics at play. The same, you know, that's the same way that I would really any historical source. So that's a big part of, you know, what has influenced my beliefs, especially on this issue, because I feel like if you truly believe every word of the Bible is good and correct and should be applied throughout all of history, you're going to come away believing some pretty wrong-headed things. And I can't really argue people out of those things from the perspective of biblical infallibility, because I can't say that the Bible doesn't say that stuff. Like, it just straight up does. But, you know, I can argue from the perspective of historical context. And so I think, you know, looking at the Bible and like talking, you know, with that verse in First Peter that I was talking about. Hang on, let me see if I can just find it, and I will read it. Okay. Likewise, wives be subject to your own husbands, so that even if some do not obey the word, they may be won without a word by the conduct of their wives. When they see your respectful and pure conduct, do not let your adorning be external, the braiding of your hair, the putting on of gold jewelry, or the clothing you wear. But let your adorning be the hidden person of your heart with the imperishable beauty of a gentle and quiet spirit, which in God's sight is very precious. For this is how the holy women who hoped in God used to adorn themselves, by submitting to their husbands, as Sarah obeyed Abraham, calling him Lord. And you are her children, if you do good and do not fear anything that is frightening. Which is also just flat out not true. Sarah did not obey Abraham.
She was like,
you literally
actually, no thanks.
She was the one who went, yo, Abraham, can you come sleep with my servant, please, so that we can have a kid? And he was like, I don't know about all that. And
he's like,
do it.
It's like he had to do a double take. He's like, wait, what? So, that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and so, like, I can't justify that. Like, I can't say, like that's very clearly, like, that's such a dude thing to say. I'm gonna say it.
It really is. Like, I'm not trying to be rude, but it is.
But I cannot imagine that if, that a book of the Bible written by a woman would say anything like that. But I think this illustrates a very good point, is like, if, looking at gender from the perspective of a social construct with a function, this, I think, very clearly illustrates the way that gender functioned in that society. Like, women had a specific role of submissiveness, and men had a specific role as well. And I think over time, as wider society changed, as our economic systems changed, as things changed, our understanding of gender changed. Like, I think a very practical example of that is, like, the women's rights movement of the early 20th century was very much fueled by the world wars, because there was an economic need for women to work. And so those advocating for women to work outside the home suddenly gained a lot more traction, because there was an economic incentive, and now that's normal. And even the people who want to roll back women's rights don't think that women shouldn't have paying jobs. So it's just, if we look at, so I want to, like, look at gender from a couple different perspectives, because there is so much that goes into it. But, like, as a social role of man and woman that we've had for thousands of years, like, it's something that is primarily influenced through the societal expectations, right? It is, and since it's something that exists only within the general vibe of society's rules, we can change our understanding of gender. Like, we can choose consciously to say, look, this is something that doesn't work for people. A pretty statistically significant segment of the population is going, this is like a harmful thing for us, and we can say, look, we're just going to choose not to view gender that way. We're going to choose not to view it as a binary. We're going to choose not to have these specific rules. And honestly, I wouldn't even say, like, it's just our current understanding of gender isn't just a problem for trans people. It's a problem for basically everyone.
Yeah.
So, it's a source of a lot of anxiety for cis people as well. And so I would say it would be a net benefit to, stop understanding gender as, girls wear dresses and men wear pants and all of the stuff. Is just like, I think society would be significantly improved if we got to a point where we didn't view gender as a significant, like, signifier of much
Yeah.
of
Or like
anything.
a significant factor in anything. Because it's like, jobs, gender has that. It's like, oh, well, this isn't always the case, but sometimes in some workplaces that are primarily white men working in them, and you have a white woman and a white man. I don't really care. Like, they're the same to me. But let's just say that she would have more credentials, but and like he doesn't. I still feel like they're like, oh, but he's a man. So, and I just feel like that's where it comes into play, and that's why it really bothers me. And then, like, the same thing with like skin color.
Yeah, and I think I've been kind of skirting around it, but like gender primarily exists as a vector of oppression. Like
Yeah.
that has been a significant portion of its function throughout most of history, has been a means of oppressing women and keeping men in power.
Mm-hmm.
And it's impossible to talk about without addressing that. And
Mm-hmm.
it's it's such a heavy topic that I don't really want to get into
Yeah.
because I don't have a lot of authority to speak on that issue. Um, but like, so I would say that gender abolition, or at least an evolving of our current understanding of gender, has a lot more stakes than just trans people. It
Yeah.
has, it's not just about me going, I feel uncomfortable when people assume I'm a woman and put me in female spaces. It also
Mm-hmm.
has to do with these gendered forms of oppression that women have to go through every day. And I mean, misogyny and patriarchy negatively affects men too. Like, there are ways that men are uniquely affected, like how statistically men are just less likely to win custody suits for children because women are assumed to be more necessary to a child's life. Like, mothers are assumed to be more necessary and more nurturing and more of an essential part of a child's life than a father,
Yeah.
which it's just flat out not true. Like, anyways, so men are more likely to commit suicide. Men are more likely to be imprisoned. Men are more likely to die in wars, and those are all gendered issues. The same as the fact that women are more likely to be sexually assaulted and sexually harassed, the fact that women are discriminated against in the workplace, and all of these other things. These are gendered issues, and these things need to be addressed as part of the package as well. So I would say, the church should be a part of that, like, both in terms of bringing forth women and encouraging them and working for their liberation, but also I would say dismantling some of the gendered ways that we do things within the church. Like a really practical example, like our youth group, our connect groups are separated into boys groups and girls groups, and then like they're separated by grade, with the upperclassmen and then the sophomores and freshmen, and then boys and girls. So there's 6 groups in total in our high school youth group, and what that does is, and I've been kind of pestering leadership about this for years, is like it really prevents an opportunity for cross-gender relationships in any
Yeah.
meaningful or intimate way. And I think that that's really unfortunate because I have not been able to get to know, you know, uh, most of our male peers because of that, because there's just been no opportunity to talk with them in any serious capacity, or to get to know them or to become friends with them within the youth group itself. And I think that's a real shame.
Yeah.
However,
because like you look at our friend group and you see me, you, and Ethan, honestly, because it was just the three of us, and we were like, okay, and then we're all, we're here and we're doing this, and honestly, that's one of the best friendships that have come out of our youth group for me, because it was just like being allowed to just like not only just communicate with each other, but like share experiences, and not like in like an intimate friendship way that normally doesn't really get to happen all that much, because it's like, oh, but like girls and guys are so different, so like we just don't want to like make them uncomfortable. But it's like those uncomfortable questions, that is the stem of friendships. Like you have to answer those, or else it just simply doesn't work.
And I don't want to be like, yes, they should just completely stop doing gendered groups, because we still live within a gendered world. Like, I think we have to live with that reality. And honestly, I didn't understand until like this month, like how deeply terrified many women are of men for like legitimate reasons, because so many women have suffered, some form of sexual harassment or sexual assault, and not been been mistreated by men in like, that's just so common. And so I don't want to like,
I don't want to force it upon anyone.
I don't want to put women in a situation where they are, forced into circumstances that they feel are unsafe or anything like that. But I think there are steps that I think we need to take, and probably practical steps that we can take within our own church, to kind of break down the walls that I see between men and women, and actually facilitate those cross-gender relationships, so that we are encouraging a more just encouraging men to be better, and encouraging a more integrated society with, respect between genders. And I think that has the very, very good bonus of being more inclusive to people like me who don't fit within the gender binary and kind of feel uncomfortable having to exist within these like very gendered spaces where it's like, I don't feel like I fit quite right anywhere.
Like, I don't feel like anyone should be forced to have to choose. Like, there's more than just two options.
Well, and even practically, like, I remember just a couple weeks ago, like, Ethan was saying how he doesn't really like his group, and he's very close friends with everybody in our group, and I was like, you should just join our group. Like, it was a joke, but it's also like, why not? Like, practically,
like,
there's no reason for him not,
Like, we're all so comfortable with him that it like, I don't think there would be a problem. Like, I don't.
Like, the reason that it's weird is like, oh, but it's a girls group. And it's like, but it doesn't need to be a gendered space. Really, practically, like, there's no reason for it to be that way. And like, I'm in that group, and I don't think about it most of the time, because I'm just like, oh these are my friends.
It's because we love you for you, and like, we don't care. Like, I can tell you that everyone in our group, and like specifically our group, because I know them the best, but like, we all don't care. Like, not that we don't care about the issues, but it's like, you can be whatever you want, and honestly, we're just gonna be here to talk about it. Like, honestly, that's what I like about our group, is that we can just talk about everything, and we can share experiences and views, and not get like offended, be like, oh, well, you like really hurt me. But it's like, yeah, those things might hurt, but then you get to know what the others are feeling through that, hard talk, which eventually does help your friendship grow stronger, which is why I love our group so much, because we're not afraid to be vulnerable and talk about the things that are really hard.
Yeah.
And I appreciate like Nicole and Jess like facilitating that too, just being like, if you guys have anything, like just call me. Like you guys have my number. Like I'm free anytime. And honestly, them and like our whole group just being open all the time is just like helped me become a better person in general. Like being able to like share hard things with a group of people that you really care about, and then them just being willing to accept it
Yeah.
and no hardships.
Yeah, and I wish that our youth group would facilitate those situations between genders too. Like, because that's
Mm-hmm.
something. I mean, I don't think men and women are necessarily trained to be vulnerable with each other.
Yeah.
Like, because growing up, like everything's so gendered, and I think the church should and does have a unique role in facilitating relationships. And I think we should focus on that because that's important. Is like training, training people to training men and women to be able to have relationships with each other and be vulnerable with each other and be able to respect each other in a platonic setting is
Yeah.
so important and something that we don't honestly get a lot because it's like, we're kind of taught that
Mm.
we can't, like, men and women can't interact with each other without like romantic romantic or sexual things getting in the way, and that's just not
Yeah.
true. And
Yeah. Like I have plenty of close guy friends that I'm like, yeah, that's them and we're friends and it's cool. And it's like if and it's I don't know about you, but it's like I always crave having like guy friends because it's also like another perspective on other things, and it kind of helps you be more aware of more situations. And honestly, just having guy friends is pretty fun too because I don't know, they're just not that guys and girls are very different, but the way we've grown up, guys and girls have grown up differently because of, I was talking to some of my guy friends actually earlier today, and they were like, we were talking about like the whole like how women are like, some of them are genuinely scared of men. And I was like, yeah, like we were taught to like never wear like really short skinless things. Like you shouldn't wear that because then that means you're asking for it. Like you should always be careful. Like you always have to look around. And they're like, we were never told any of this. And I'm like, yeah, so honestly, and it's also just like I like being there to help them with stuff like that too, without it being weird. And
mm-hmm.
it's just
and you can't facilitate those sorts of discussions without first establishing relationships, and like
yeah.
that's something that's been so discouraging. Like I've seen some men like respond to the Me Too movement with like, oh, okay, well, I'll just never be alone in a room with a woman because that means that it's impossible for me to do anything without witnesses, and it's impossible for her to
Mm-hmm.
accuse me of anything falsely
Mm-hmm.
because I'll just never be alone in a room with a woman. And I'm like, that's
Like that's not the
so
point.
not that is so not the point. Like you cannot have an actual you can't gain understanding without first facilitating relationships. Like you can't
Mm-hmm.
men can't understand the things that women are actually going through without talking to them and like
Mm-hmm.
truly and truly being safe for women so
Mm-hmm.
that they can understand women's fears. Because like, yeah, like women just don't assume men to be safe. Like they have to establish themselves because in women's experiences, what we've been taught and like what women have experienced has rightfully like made them feel that men cannot be trusted unless they have established themselves as being safe. And
Yeah.
so kind of once I understood that, because like I've never had any like really negative experiences with men. Like, I've been mansplained to or whatever, but like I've never had any of those sort of experiences that have made me think that. I've never been around I've never had to be around people who I felt were unsafe or like be in situations where I felt unprotected. So like once I understood that how truly scared many women are. Like I understood a lot of transphobia better, honestly. I was like, because so much of the like fear mongering has been around like men and women's spaces, like there, if we let trans women into the bathrooms, then we're just letting men in to be able to sexually assault us or whatever. And I was just, and that's fundamentally not true and very transphobic. But like, I finally understood the fear that was playing off of, and like, it made me a lot more sympathetic. So yeah, it's like, so many of these issues are like, they're not really biblical, they are societal. Like, these things come from the culture, and generally, like, as Christians, a very common thing is that we're told is like, we're not supposed to be of the world, we are supposed to be of God. And it's really, really easy for the world to infect our understanding of God. And like, we read the Bible with our experiences influencing our interpretation. And so it's really, really important to be critical of what you actually, of how general ideas from society are interfering with your interpretation of God. Because, we think of God as gendered male, but that's not actually accurate. That's not how God is actually described in the Bible. The God is metaphors for God are God is seen as a father, but also a mother.
Yeah, and I like to think of God not just like as like a he, him, she, her, but more just as a being in general.
Right. God
like
is
they are just there.
Yeah.
Like it's hard to explain without using pronouns, but
yeah, I typically try to, when I talk about God, I try to change the pronouns that I use depending on the situation. So like in general reference, I'll use they, them, but if I'm talking about like a specific role of God, I might use like specific pronouns depending on, like, for example, when I think of God, like God the Father, like when I think of God as a parent, I usually use like she, her pronouns, because my nurturing relationship was with my mother mostly. So so I think that's really an important thing to hit on, is like, God exists beyond gender. Like, God exists outside of gender, but they also created gender. So, or maybe it would be more accurate to say that humans created gender, but God created sex. Like, he created humans with these varieties of bodies and body types and all of this stuff. So like, and created us with different psychology and all of these things that, in a way, like, these varieties of genders, people kind of hate on non-binary as like, all these made up genders or whatever, but like, this variety is actually reflective of God. It is reflective of the vastness and the diversity of God. And I think that that's a very beautiful thing. I think something that I see Christians do a lot is like really expressing that there's only like one or a few ways to be holy. Like, this idea that you are the gender that your parents, that the doctor says you are, and then you have to grow up and get married to the opposite sex or stay single for the rest of your life, and those are the only ways to be holy. It's just like so fundamentally against the glory of God, because you're limiting God, like by limiting God's church. You are saying that there is only one way to reflect God, and if we are supposed to be the reflection of God, then you are fundamentally narrowing God into this very specific view, this very specific Western heterosexual understanding of God that is counter to what we see outlined in the Bible, is that like as a church we are called to be diverse, we are called to be multi-ethnic, multicultural, have all these different expressions of God, because God is so great. So I think that being able to be, being different from the norm and being different from what the powerful and what the authorities say that you're supposed to be is a very Christian thing. Like, that's something that we saw in Jesus's life. That's something that we saw. That's something that we see throughout history, is a rebellion against tradition, to go after a more full understanding of God. And that's something that I think I was raised in a little bit. Like my parents, particularly my mom, was always very big on like questioning narrative, like questioning these sorts of, questioning what the church tells you, what your pastor tells you, like really dig in for yourself. Because I think largely because my mom was very non-traditional, in very specific ways. My parents' divorce had a big influence on that, because she felt so abandoned by church people during and after. And those people were Summit. Like that was Summit. That was her church. And so she kind of had to go against the grain. Like she had to be able to strike out on her own and create her own faith and forge her own path, because she wasn't getting any support from the church. And so I think she raised us in that. And unfortunately for her, that caused my sister and I to gain some ideas and beliefs that she doesn't really like. And that scare her a bit. And so we've kind of talked about the social element of gender, like the way that it functions as a societal construct, and like how we perceive people and how it influences our thinking in that regard. But like I think there are so many different facets of gender, of like what we call gender, that honestly it's kind of a nonsense word, because like in a lot of ways we're also talking about psychology and presentation. I mean, like literally just fashion and biology and all of this stuff, and philosophy. I mean, it's a very philosophical thing. And so I think like the reason why I say, rather than saying like my gender changes, which sounds kind of trite, like that's why I say my experience of my gender changes, because in so many ways it feels like it's happening to me, where it's like the things that fluctuate like are how I want to be perceived socially, but also how I feel about my body. And and there's like genuine psychological stuff going on, because I experience dysphoria, and all of this stuff like changes so much that it's really hard to explain. And I think it's really hard to quantify in a way that cis people can understand. Like, because I've noticed with a lot of stuff, like there's so many times where I've seen with like these various labels, people be like, I don't know what it means, but I'm that. Like where it's like, you can't quite put it into words, but being able to have something that just kind of intuitively makes sense with your own experience. And that's kind of why I decided to start identifying with the term gender fluid. Is like I'd known I was non-binary for a long time. Like I knew that I wasn't a woman, like that just wasn't me. But yeah, so I think that's one of the hardest things, because trans people are fighting for civil rights right now. Like we want to have most people don't believe we exist. Like most people think that we're lying, or that we are attention seeking, or that we're just mentally ill or whatever. And it's like it's really hard, because we don't have like a concrete like explanation. Like it's I can't just say, I can just say like, this is what is going on concretely, and here is like, you know, there's studies, like there is, that's not to say that there's no science to it. Like there have been, scientists have been looking into the like effects of hormones in the womb and all of this stuff, and like the general scientific consensus, like the anthropological consensus, is that trans people exist. That's a fundamental fact, but that's not really, like when you're trying to convince someone that, like I would say kind of the worst feeling in the world is having to justify your own existence to someone. And it's so much worse when you can't really explain yourself to them. And I think that's why I've noticed a lot of trans people, like myself included, tend to fall back on like our pain and talking about like our dysphoria, because that's like a concrete thing that we can point to. Like, you know, you can deny all of this stuff, but like how can someone tell me that like I'm not suffering from this real like medical? But I don't think that dysphoria is what makes someone trans, and I think that can kind of be the unfortunate implication of that line of thinking, of like people using their dysphoria as kind of the proof. I don't think, like, I don't define myself by my pain. You know, I think our identity is from relationship. Like, I think that that's where identity primarily comes from. And so I don't want to give that implication. Like, I think the pain is a symptom, right? Like pain is a symptom of, that is something given to us by God to let us know that the world is broken. Like there's something wrong within ourselves and within the world. And we experience pain as a result of that. And so like when I experience dysphoria, it's because the way that people are perceiving me or acknowledging me is wrong, like, or there is something wrong within my body that like I need to change. And so there's like a social aspect and there's a psychological aspect, and those two things kind of interact. My gender can be a source of joy as well, and I think that is, you know, in those moments where things, you know, shown things as they should be, like, but I think for a lot of trans people, like especially myself recently, I've been going through a really rough time recently, is like the pain feels very real, whereas I feel like the sources of joy are often kind of subjective and very superficial. And so, you know, it's like, oh, the backer at the grocery store, there was a situation where like I was wearing a mask and I think like she couldn't tell, and so she was like, "Have a good day, sir or madam." And I was like, "Oh, that was so sweet. Like you have no idea how happy that made me."
Yeah.
Like, you know, or just like certain clothes or like the way that I look. And like those things are often seen as vanity. So that's a really hard, it's really hard to argue that logically, because it's so personal and it's so emotional. And that's something I think for myself has been a huge source of pain, is like I really desperately want to be taken seriously. Like I'm a very prideful person inherently. Like that is probably one of the biggest sins that I struggle with, is like I just want people to respect me and like me and take me seriously. And so it's really hard to be like, yes, this is a pretty fundamental piece of who I am. I can't explain it to you. I can't justify it to you. You're just going to have to take my word for it. And a lot of people don't. And I have to put my faith in God and know, like, I have to practice not caring what those people think. And that's really hard.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I so want to be validated. Like, I just want people to validate me. And I'm such a people pleaser. And I mean, like, you know, it took me so long to tell people, I think, like, that I was trans, especially because, I mean, I guess technically it took me a lot longer to tell people I was bi, but also I wasn't sure for a while. But like when I told you guys for the first time at camp, and it was such a horrible situation because first of all, I didn't even say I was bi. I was like, I said, we were telling our like stories, you know, that like that we had to like our life stories basically. And I was just, I think I said something like, and then I realized that I was attracted to women as well as men, and then just moved on like as fast as possible because I didn't want to talk about it. And no one reacted, and I was just like, and I felt so awful afterwards because I didn't even like come out as bisexual. Like I like the way that I said it was worded so ambiguously that like I could have just been saying, like, I could have been expressing that as like a struggle rather than like something that I was proud of, because I wasn't proud of it. Like I was still very ashamed to tell people because I didn't know how they would react, even though like I didn't think it was a sin. And then afterwards, our leader at the time, like we were in Chick-fil-A, like on the bus ride home, and she and I were sitting at a table, and she was like, you know, like we've got other people in the youth group who are struggling with that sort of thing. So if you ever need to talk, and I was just like, in my mind, I was like, I'm never coming to you about this. I'm never talking to you about this ever.
Yeah.
Nope. And so
you were like, actually, we're just gonna turn around and walk the other way. Thank you.
Yeah, we're gonna back up and just like not address that for years.
Forget that happened.
Yeah, it was real bad. And so I think that kind of, I don't know, I think, and like none of the actual group themselves reacted in any way. So it's just like, I'm just gonna forget about this and not bring it up. And then
I just kind of rolled with it because I didn't know if like you wanted to talk about it. So I was just like, okay.
Yeah, exactly.
Like,
and like I didn't say it in a way that invited conversation. And so nobody wanted to talk about it. Like I totally skimmed over it. And I was just, yeah. So, but I mean, I still haven't told my family that I'm bi. Like I've told my sister, and I've sort of told my stepmom. I don't know if she actually heard me.
You're just like, so we're just gonna guess you did.
So like all like my sister and my step siblings know, and like a lot of my friends know, but none of the rest of my family knows because I don't know how to bring it up. Like I just don't.
Yeah,
like,
I get it.
Whereas with like when I came out as trans, like the first, like I came out to my sister and I came out to some of my friends, and I was kind of forced to come out to my mom because she had made some comment about some of my friends who were trans, and I started bawling, like, and I could not stop for multiple hours. And she was like, what is going on? What is wrong with you? So I kind of had to tell her. Otherwise, I would have just been lying to her straight up. And I was like, this is the situation. Like, this is the scenario in which it's relevant. So I should say it. And it was not a good time. Reactions have been mixed, to say the least. Like, I definitely have not gotten the support that I think I need. Because like if my parents were accepting, there would be a lot of things that I would do. Like I would totally be like if I could, I would want to go on like hormone blockers and stuff until I was an adult and could actually get like testosterone and take some steps to have a real medical transition. But I'm not going to bring that up to my parents because there's no way that they would. And at this point, I'm old enough that it's kind of like it's too late, and I'll just wait till I'm an adult and financially independent, anyways. But you know, and it wasn't just the stuff that I needed after I came out and like after I discovered these things about myself. It was, you know, everything that happened before then. Like the way that I grew up and the way that I was raised and the things that I was taught were contributed to so much shame. And that's stuff that I'm still undoing. Like, I talked about the other day how much like the phrase like love the sinner, hate the sin, it gets thrown around. And like, it's important like that people remember when you talk about these issues that you think are like out there or somehow abstract or like away from you, like there are potentially people around you, queer people, queer children, like your child might end up being gay. Like that's definite possibility, and you need to actually think about what you're saying and what you're exposing them to, because I mean that kind of like, I was never faced with like outright hate or anything, but I was told like basically, yeah, we're going to be I was told by my family and by people within the church that we're going to be loving and accepting of you, hypothetical queer person, but we're not going we hate the sin, what we perceive as a sin, which is actually a part of who you are. And so, even though that wasn't being said directly to me, what I as a child internalized is like, okay, if I want to be loved by everybody basically, I have to project a version of myself that is acceptable to them because they don't love me, right?
Yeah.
And that contributes to so much self-hatred and so much shame, and you wonder why I have vulnerability issues. Like I can't.
Yeah, it is really hard when like you get told that as a child and you're just like, oh, well, guess I gotta pretend now. And
Time to repress. Yeah. And I think I feel like I'm in kind of a weird situation because I really, I was never in a position where I was like, where I intellectually, like once I actually thought about these things, like once I actually thought about, once I kind of tackled the homosexuality like issue, when I really started thinking about my personal faith and when I started thinking about politics, I kind of immediately accepted that it wasn't a sin, and and I intellectually knew that, but I still had all of that internalized shame. So that was a really weird position to be in, because for years, and even still kind of now, I'm in this position where I'm like, well, I don't believe I'm doing anything wrong. I don't think any of this stuff is wrong, but everybody else does. So for me, honestly, like expressing dissent is kind of harder than expressing my sins, right? It's really hard to talk about like things to do with my sexuality or with my gender in the church and amongst church people, because I know that the the place where we're operating from is often two completely different places, where like I'm just talking about something in my life, like a very practical, just like, yeah, this is a thing that is going on with me. And whoever I'm talking to may or may not perceive it as a sin. And like, I really, there's just so, I don't know, there's something so heartbreaking to me about like that situation, is because I don't know what to, I don't know. I just want I just want people to like me and love me.
Yeah.
I just but yeah, and so what I've been dealing with, I think, especially in the past year, is going through this process of like really truly letting my self-worth come from God, and letting my identity flow from God and not from other people's validation. And that's been really hard, because it's involved distancing myself emotionally from people, from family members and stuff like that. And just being able to like put more stock in the people who actually will love me and support me has been a hard but important process. And yeah, like when I came out as trans to our friend group, that was so validating, even though it wasn't everything, but like just to have you guys be like, yeah, cool, we're gonna support you is like was so relieving, because just the not knowing, meant that I was operating as if you guys weren't going to accept me, and therefore I was keeping a distance. I was keeping this distance that didn't need to be there. So I would say if cis people and straight people and just like, I guess kind of everybody, like, if one thing that you can take away from this is like create environments where people feel safe, because that is such a huge thing. It's just being able to truly feel like you are not being judged and you're being loved and supported truly by the people you are with is so powerful. And I think as the church, that is what we are called to be.
I mean, honestly, when you came out, not that I wasn't surprised, but I was like, yeah, she can, like, not that I knew that you were holding things back, but it did feel like you were kind of like, there were some topics where you just were like, let's not talk about that right now. So it's just like, when you said it, I was like, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And I feel like then you were able to really like be your true self without having to be like, well, I have to hide this from them and I need to make sure I don't slip up and like say something because I don't want something to like go wrong or anything. And I feel like you also coming out helped me personally, because I've been thinking about things and I'm like, well, how do I feel about my sexuality? Like, what do I think and how do I feel? And then I've come to the conclusion basically that I'm just like, I'm kind of just here and I'm moving my life and I'll figure it out as I go. I don't really know right now, but it's like, I'm here to just have fun.
Yeah.
And not cause any trouble.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, that's been kind of how I've felt. There have been certain points where I'm like, am I really bisexual, or maybe I'm pansexual, or like certain other things, or like, am I like some form of ace, or like this stuff and all this stuff? And I'm like, I don't really care.
Yeah.
I know I am queer, and like when I say I'm bisexual, like that communicates what people need to know about me. It's like, I like people, like my romantic feelings are not influenced by gender, and like when I say I'm gender fluid, that's the label that works for me right now, so I don't really care. They're just words, and I think they are the most accurate descriptors I have at this point. And so I don't really care about like finding all of the specific labels that like really that say precisely who and what I am, because like I just am what I am. Like I don't really care that much. But, the labels are helpful as part of an identifier of like a social identifier, like so people understand what's going on with me, and also to identify myself with like a general struggle. There's that C.S. Lewis quote that I think Zach says a lot, where it's like, friendship begins when someone says, oh, you too? I thought I was the only one. And so it's like, I kind of felt like this imperative, like this conviction from God to come out for a long time, because I was like, because of that, like I was like, if I'm out, like then other people can come to me. And like that's something that's so exciting. Like being able to have other queer people, like other trans people, come to me is like, oh my gosh, that's so cool. Like I can support other people. Like that's so cool. That's so encouraging. Yeah.
How many wedding rings out of 10 are we gonna give this? I say your talk was a 100 wedding rings out of 10. You get 100 wedding rings.
I really have no idea of anything I just said. Hopefully, when we release this, it will prompt people to ask me questions.
Yes.
Because
oh my gosh, I could put a question board up. People can ask questions. Our 5 viewers.
I guess that's it. Thank you everybody so much for listening. If you have any questions and you're on YouTube, then you can just leave those in the comments below. If not, you can probably hit up our Instagram.
Heck yeah. Whoop, whoop.
Okay. Hit up our Instagram then. We're also now releasing episodes on Amazon as well as on Spotify and YouTube. So you can listen there if you so desire. Other than that, if you want to hear me talk more about these kind of loaded issues, you can visit my YouTube channel, Reagan Eli Bartels. It's just my name. Next week we are talking about Riverdale. Madelyn's gonna be talking about Riverdale.
Ready. I'm
so excited.
So I'm up to date. We're gonna talk all the things.
I'm so
It'll probably
excited.
mostly be on season 1 because that's most what they talked about. But we are gonna be talking about the other seasons and how ridiculous they do get. So listen in next time.
Yeah, if you like Riverdale, if you hate Riverdale,
you should listen to it.
If you don't know what Riverdale is and want to know what all the fuss is about, what all the kids are talking about, tune in. Yeah. So
thank you for listening and come back next time. Ciao. Good ciao. Good ciao. Why am I? Oh my gosh. Why did I say good ciao? I think it's because I was thinking about cars. And Lightning McQueen. Good ciao.
Bye.
Bye.